IoT meets cyber and security. Through software you can reconfigure IoT things that are connected, so software is actually ruling your environment. Connected software programs are controlling, monitoring many entities around you. This brings a lot of opportunities but also lots of challenges. In my keynote I will set the stage for IoT meets cyber and security.
I will first of all introduce the process mining technology, where we take data from underlying IT systems or customer relations management systems, so any system where we collect data, and we will connect them with the Celonis software, where we can first of all reconstruct how processes are run in the real world, in the businesses. Then we can analyze and find bottlenecks in the process. And finally, we want to find improvement potentials in order to make the process more efficient and smarter, more effective, more sustainable. Upload the data, analyze the data, and in the end also find business value in the delivery process. In the hands-on challenge, you will all get your individual access, your individual license of the academic edition of the Celonis execution management system. And then there, upload own data from a delivery process, analyze the data by creating own dashboards, and in the end also coming up with improvement potentials, so telling where the process can be improved in specific ways to make it better and faster and also better for the customers in the end.
Code. It is the main method that we use to define our world today. With code we define smartphone apps, websites, but also critical infrastructure that supply us with energy, production and health. So for code to be such a powerful method, we need to know how to use it securely. So we will talk with actions have to take place to make code secure, how to implement them into the development lifecycle, and how research in the industry, but also Rickrolling, will help us to produce secure code.
Cybersecurity Challenges is a new and innovative way to learn security software development. This game was developed at Siemens in partnership with the University of Armed Forces in Munich and IXPs in Portugal. In this hands-on workshop, the participants will be presented with exercises containing vulnerable code. The goal of the game is for the participants to collect points through fixing the existing security vulnerabilities while keeping the functionality of the code intact. We welcome you to our challenges and hope you have a good time.
Securing distributed and collaborative business processes that involve industrial Internet of Things or services in a cross-organizational context is a challenging task. It becomes even more difficult when the involved parties do not trust each other completely. This keynote presents some real-world use cases where there is a need to enforce cross-organizational business processes without a trusted third party.
Here at AWS, we consider that security is job zero. The purpose of the keynote is to give you all the key to understand the AWS cloud and the associated value proposition regarding information security. I will first introduce AWS and its peculiar vision about cloud computing. I will then explain how to build resilient and secure application on AWS while presenting the key security principles associated to the cloud. We will talk about self-healing system, high availability, serverless, managed services, defense in depth, network security, and security at the edge of agility. At the end of the keynote, you will know most of the security fundamentals of cloud security and will be presented one
unwanted traffic hits your network and is flooding and exhausting your resources. One of the most severe problems that we have in cybersecurity today. DDoS attacks cause financial and operational trouble for even the largest networks that we have out there. DDoS for hire service allows anybody without any technical expertise to execute DDoS attacks. You can't really protect against that. This is a really serious problem that we have in the internet these days. We need to do something about it. How it works, how big the problem really is, this is what we will cover in the talk.
Welcome to talk.cybercni.fr.
Bienvenue.
Welcome to Talk CyberCNI FR. Today, already the 13th edition, the December edition. And as usual, your monthly cybersecurity speaker series will enlighten you about cybersecurity. And today, I'm sure that we'll have new insights and exciting facts about the cybersecurity. Sorry for the noise in the background. The entire day, there was no noise. But of course, now when the series starts, they started working. So before we come to Oliver, we'll talk today a quick switch to this one here. Those of you who are longer in the stream, I showed it just before the series started today. As some of you might remember, because I announced it last time, we had our PhD winter school on IoT meets cyber and security 2 weeks ago here in Rennes. And it was really a blast because we had 18 participants on site and more than 150 registered in the stream. And good thing is everything was recorded. You've seen it in the trailer who was participating. You see it also a little bit here on the left. And when you go to schoolfutureiot.org, you find the program, and on the YouTube channel, you find all the recordings. And if you missed it, there you can also have a look. There we also had very interesting cybersecurity talks. Good. So for today's edition, as always, on all channels where you're connected, so might it be over LinkedIn, over YouTube, over Facebook, use the Slido as back channel. Also, even if you don't have questions, just go there and check which questions are in the program. You can upvote, you can download questions. Today's URL or code is cybercni/13 because it's the 13th edition. I also show it on the slides. Actually, just that I see it, so I put 12, so I will correct it in a second. So cybercni-13 when you go to slido.com, or just scan the QR code that we see here on the left. All right, good. So that said, please join the Slido. Let me jump back to this view. So, as you've seen it already in the trailer, today I'm super happy to welcome Professor Dr. Oliver Hohlfeld from the BTU Brandenburg. And I know Oliver for a long time, and it's always a pleasure exchanging with him, and I'm super happy that he accepted my invitation for today's edition. So Oliver is a professor at the Brandenburg University of Technology in Germany. He obtained his PhD from TU Berlin, and he was a member of the Deutsche Telekom Labs in Berlin. His research focuses on using data-driven approaches to study the internet at large, and in particular its current cybersecurity problems. And that said, the topic is DDoS attacks and booters services. Oliver, I hand over directly to you, and we are looking forward to your talk.
So thanks for the very kind and nice introduction. Also welcome from my side. It's a great pleasure to be with you today virtually. And today we are going to be talking about DDoS attacks, which to me is one of the most pressing problems that we have in cybersecurity these days. So we will be talking about what DDoS attacks are, what their characteristics are, how easy it is to launch them, and also what we can do to mitigate these attacks. Before we start, let me actually take the opportunity to introduce myself. So Mark Oliver did that quite a little bit. So I like measuring stuff, measuring internet performance, internet security, and particularly also the user experience. And as Mark Oliver said, I'm a professor at Brandenburg University of Technology. If you now wonder what on earth is Brandenburg, I have the answer here for you. So Brandenburg is the federal state that is surrounding Berlin. So Berlin, the capital of Germany, is here right in the middle. Brandenburg is the federal state that is surrounding Berlin. And BTU is the technical university, the only one that we have in the state of Brandenburg. And I'm located here in Cottbus, which is close to the Polish border. The other one that we have in Brandenburg, and what Brandenburg is very famous for, is the Spreewald. The Spreewald is a forest that is surrounded by many small rivers. That's actually the river Spree that you see here is then forking into many small channels here, and they're like in this forest here. Maybe this map doesn't show you a lot, so I also brought pictures. This is how one of these channels in the Spreewald River actually looks like. So you have lots of waterways here, hiking paths, and of course, lots of houses that are built next to the river. You can do canoeing here. I also like to do that quite a lot in the summer. So this is all nice and shiny, but there's of course one danger. What if the water levels rise? So if there is a flooding, and so unwanted traffic is actually hitting these houses, these owners here of these properties, of course, have a problem. And then, of course, you might say that, yeah, well, but this is the danger that you have to live if you build a house right next to a river, and you can actually mitigate that by, moving away. If we now look back from the Spreewald River into the internet that we're using on a daily basis, we have exactly the same problem. This is called DDoS attacks. So the victims are flooded with requests, with traffic that they actually never requested, and that is causing troubles for them, and we need to do something about it. Doing something about DDoS attacks is, as we will see, much harder than moving away from a certain location here. And if we now look at just the news reports over the previous years, we see record-hitting numbers in the of DDoS attacks that are targeted against the largest networks that we have in the internet. Akamai, Google, all of them were hit by DDoS attacks in nowadays the area or the scale of several terabits per second. So this is substantial traffic, unwanted, causing trouble that these networks have to deal with. And this is the big problem that we have in cybersecurity these days. And if you just look into the newspaper every now and then, a new record-hitting DDoS attack is being reported. This is the threat that we have. The attack surface is growing. If we just look, this is a recent report, so from November this year from Kaspersky Lab. So DDoS attacks in the third quarter of this year are growing by 24%. They're becoming more sophisticated. So this really is a thing that we need to do something about. And this something is that we are doing currently in a project that we have together with the DKIX Internet Exchange Point and Banox Network. It's called IDOS, Artificial Intelligence-Based DDoS Mitigation, directly in the core of the internet. And of course, it involves a lot of amazing collaborators that are involved in the research that I'm going to present to you. So what I'm going to show you today is the work that we have been doing in the last 3 years with an amazing team of collaborators, and you will see their names later when I show you the prefaces of the papers that I'm going to cover. So let us actually start with understanding and what the DDoS attack actually is. So the goal of a DDoS attack is to exhaust the victim's resources. That could be, for example, bandwidth. So you want to make the victim, which could be a web shop, able to actually react to benign customers. So for example, people that currently want to do their Christmas shopping. And with that, you cause financial trouble because people just like us that are going to buy for Christmas, they're unable to access the shop anymore because of these traffic floods that actually hit the victim. So that's the goal of the attacker that you see here on the left-hand side. So the attacker wants to direct traffic that the victim never requested to exhaust the victim's resources. Of course, if the attacker generates all of the traffic himself, it might probably be not sufficient traffic. So we need to do something to generate higher levels of traffic. And with that, we use something that are called reflection attacks. So we use other resources in the networks. This is public servers, could be, for example, an NTP time server or a DNS server, other public servers that we are sending traffic against. And this traffic is then reflected, and hence the name reflection DDoS attack, towards the victim. Of course, if we just do that with one reflector, we might get a modest amount of traffic. But if we add more reflectors, we can increase the amount of attack traffic that we're generating here, and that really exhausts the victim's resources. So what we see here is reflection attacks. We can further exploit certain protocols to add an additional property to reflection attacks, which are then called amplification attacks. Amplification means that the reflector answers to the target or the victim with a much larger response than the request that the attacker sent. Meaning you send a little bit of traffic with a spoofed IP address, and the spoofed IP address is the one of the target. You send a bit of traffic, and a much larger response is then reflected towards the target. This is the ultimate goal of the attacker if an amplification reflection attack has been used. And this is the kind of attack that is currently causing trouble in the internet, because with certain protocols, such as, for example, Memcached, you see amplification factors of a factor of 51,000 or larger, meaning you send 1 byte in to the reflector and 51K are reflected back to the target. This is substantial. Just think about the attacker generates 1 gigabit of traffic towards the reflectors, and 51 times that 1 gigabit are reflected back to the target. This is a substantial problem, and this is what is causing trouble these days. And of course, as said before, the attack surface is kind of limited if you just use one reflector. If you use a global set of many reflectors in many different networks, you can reach substantial traffic volumes that we have seen in these record hitting news in the previous slide. So multiple terabit DDoS attacks are possible with this kind of attack. So this is the problem that we have to deal with it. And it's, of course, unwanted traffic. And of course, you might answer that, okay, well, we need something for mitigating DDoS attacks. We need to do something about it. The problem is it's hard. Mitigating and detecting DDoS attacks, in particular in the core of the network, as we will see, is hard, but it's not impossible. Why is it so hard? It's very clear from what we see here that this is unwanted traffic. This is the kind of traffic that the victim doesn't want to receive. But of course, like from a bird's eye perspective, what is the difference between this unwanted traffic and actually wanted traffic? So all of us are shopping for Christmas, and this e-commerce shop is really popular, and in December it receives a lot of traffic. What's the difference? This is wanted traffic, this is unwanted traffic, but this is also generated from a large set of users. So differentiating these two cases between attack traffic and something that we call a very popular service or a flash crowd event, this is actually a tricky part. But of course, there are statistical properties that you can use to actually differentiate these cases here. but we will have a look into that later. So solutions exist. Let us now look into what do we actually need to do if we want to run a DDoS attack. So if we want to run a DDoS attack, we of course require technical expertise and infrastructure to abuse. That might, for example, be the reflectors, so open DNS servers, open NTP servers that we have on the internet. And these are the two ingredients that we need in order to launch a DDoS attack. And if we just now look at the infrastructure, well, this is well known. I just explained to you what you need. So you need to scan for open public DNS, public NTP, public memcached servers in the internet. And then you basically have the infrastructure. So you use somebody else's infrastructure and protocol flaws to launch these attacks. So this is the kind of infrastructure that you need, maybe a bit more, but basically that's it. So the infrastructure part covered, we understand that. There's a pretty solid understanding of how these public infrastructure is being abused. What about the technical expertise? What should we do about the technical expertise? Well, if I'm lacking expertise, what we do these days, we Google it. And let's do that here. We need a DDoS for hire service, which means that I don't want to actually launch the DDoS attack myself, but I'm paying somebody to do that. These services exist. We can find them on Google. They are targeting non-technical experienced people, so they should be easily Googleable. And they're called booter services. Many of them exist. You can Google for that. That's kind of public. And so I'm showing you an example here. This is a booter service, DEFCON Pro. They are also called stress tester or stressor service. And what they're targeting is basically fixing new ways or finding new ways to fix old problems. You can create an account. They have pretty usable websites, and you can use that to launch your DDoS attacks. They have 24/7 support, and they even offer a stop button. So once you press start, you can press a stop button to also stop the attack. All of that is pretty convenient, high uptime. So you can use that for stress testing and so on. They, of course, they run DDoS protection services themselves. And you might be going to ask now, okay, is this going to be expensive? What's your guess? You can go on these websites, you can Google them, and we can look up the prices. So this is the pricing scheme of the DEFCON Pro booter that I just show you here as a screenshot. And you see this is in the order of few US dollars. So it's really cheap, and it's sufficient to generate enough DDoS traffic to at least impact our university. So if a student were to do that in the middle of the exam period or doing online teaching, good luck with that. It's very cheap, and you kind of see where the problem is coming from. It's cheap to launch these attacks, and it's hard to mitigate against these attacks from the victim's perspective. So what we then looked into was this booter service. We wanted to better understand this ecosystem. So this is a work that we published at IMC 2019 together with folks from DKIX and the University of Twente, Benox, and MPI for Informatics in Saarbrücken. And to kind of contrast this, let me basically state, what do we know about these booter services? So most of the information that we have comes out of leaked customer databases. So we basically know a bit about the customer perspective. So who is actually subscribing to that, or at least what are they doing? How many attacks are they purchasing? How much money do they actually invest into launching DDoS attacks? We know a bit about the victims. We know about blacklisting and fingerprinting attempts. And there's also a marketing study about booter services. This is all known. What we don't know so much about is the effectiveness of these booter services. So do they actually deliver what they promise? You pay for an attack. How much of an attack do you actually get back for the money that you're paying? And that was one of the driving questions behind that paper, or what we actually started with. So we thought that, okay, well, let's try to attack our own infrastructure. So we paid for these attacks, and we attacked a research network that was directly connected to a major internet exchange point. So we basically had everything under control. These research AS didn't contain any other servers that are not used for measurements, and with the collaboration here with the IXP, we could actually precisely control and monitor the attack that was going on to make sure that no harm is actually generated by that. So we subscribed to a number of booter services. As you saw, the prices are basically really cheap. Typically, they make one differentiation between non-VIP and more expensive VIP services. And the differentiation here is basically how much traffic is being generated. So the non-VIP services are cheap, and you basically get something in the order of 8 to 12 gigabits per second of attack traffic. That's what they promise. With the more expensive VIP services, they promise attack traffic in the order of 80 to 100 gigabits. So this is already fairly substantial, and we of course wanted to see if we subscribe to this, how much of DDoS attack traffic do we actually get back. So what you see here is a plot where I show you the attack traffic volume in gigabits on the y-axis and the duration of the attack in seconds. The first thing that you see is the start button works. So there's an almost immediate start after we clicked start on the web interface. The attack traffic starts to come in. And there's also a controlled stop possible, so the stop button also works. The attack traffic is almost immediately going away. Also, we see that there is a substantial traffic rate coming in. So this is the red curve here is using a DDoS attack that is abusing the memcached protocol. This is about 8 to 10 gigabits per second here. And we get substantially higher traffic rates, more than 17.5 gigabits, if we're using NTP as an amplification protocol here. So we already see that it seems like that the amplification protocol that is being abused seems to make a difference in terms of the attack traffic that we're getting back. But the good news is that these booter services work, so you get what you pay for, at least in the non-VIP category. And here we have a zoom in into the different kind of attack amplification protocols that you can pay for and select in these web services of booter services. So we see here the dots in the blue are NTP-based attacks, and also here we see for a number of these studied attacks, NTP seems to generate the highest traffic rates in these studied booter services. So basically what we learned from this is that booter services work. It might be a bit shocking. So you pay a little bit of money and you get substantial traffic rates back. So they kind of work. For the VIP services, we didn't get the high traffic rates that they were promising, but for the non-VIP services, they actually delivered what they promised. So booter services work. They are a thing. They're a problem to deal with. Of course, we're not the only ones that have this knowledge. So this is kind of known. And in 2018, a number of these high-profile booter services were taken down in a legal action coordinated by the FBI and other law enforcement bodies. So the websites were taken down, they were seized, and no longer available. So the second, and that was the main part of that IMC paper, was we wanted to understand this effect of this FBI takedown on the entire DDoS landscape. Does it lead to a reduction in the global DDoS traffic if we remove these high-profile booter services and make them unavailable? So what we did was we measured the DDoS attack landscape before and after the takedown at a major internet exchange point, so at the core of the internet. And I'm going to show you here the time series of the events. So we have here the actual takedown operation, and then we have a 30 to 40 day window around that. And what I'm showing you here on the y-axis is the number of NTP attacks. We have generated this plot for a kind of a number of amplification protocols. So BAM-CACHE-D, they all look very similar. So I'm only showing you here the plot for NTP attacks. And so what you see here is that this attack landscape in terms of the number of NTP-based DDoS attacks that are visible at this internet exchange point, it's kind of fluctuating. And then here where the orange bar is, this is where the FBI were actually taking down these booter websites and making them unavailable. What we see then here is that almost immediately afterwards, the attack traffic, it drops a bit, but then afterwards, it ramps up very quickly. So it drops only for a few days, and then it ramps up very quickly again. And for this dip here, so we did run a number of statistical tests. We don't even know if this dip here is statistically significant. So did the FBI takedown had any effect on the global DDoS landscape that we see here from the perspective of this big IXP? Well, we don't know. And it seems like not really. So at least there was no long-lasting influence of these takedowns on the attack landscape from what we can see. So the second part is then we wanted to better understand this popularity of these booter services domains because we couldn't see any effect on the traffic. So do we see any effect on the popularity of these domains? So we did run extensive DNS crawling by monitoring more than 200 million domain names, downloading their HTML pages, and then running regular expressions against the HTML pages to identify booter services and then monitor these domains and the popularity of these domains in the Alexa rank. And this is what I'm going to show you here. So this is the relative rank in the Alexa top 1 million for domains that were, these are the red dots. These were the 15 or the booter service domains that were actually taken down by the FBI. And then we, of course, identified a larger set of booter services that were not taken down by the FBI and looked into the popularity distribution here. And we see that nothing. So the takedowns didn't have any effect on these popularity. It's even that, at least in the Alexa rank, but this is an understandable effect, some of the booter services that were actually taken down, they of course increased in popularity, and that was because they were actually mentioned in the news, so their domain names became public, and that of course increased the traffic towards those domains. And so they were actually increasing in Alexa rank, but overall there was no effect visible here. So we see an entire spectrum of booter services that can easily be found by actually Googling for them. So that was the first step. And then we thought that, well, it seems like we're talking like forever about this DDoS landscape. So this is not the first paper. There's countless of papers that have been written about DDoS. And we kind of know since years of how this problem should be mitigated at the perspective or at the side of these reflectors. So for example, we know in particular how the NTP protocol is being abused for launching DDoS attacks, and in principle, fixes would be possible. but it seems like this problem is never dying. So every year there are more papers written about DDoS attacks, and it's like the problem is not going away, even though we have fixes that would simply stop the problem at kind of the root cause. So, for example, at the reflectors. Of course, it's very complicated. New amplification protocols emerge, and new ways to abuse them are being identified. So it kind of looks like this problem is not going away, and it's like it's just becoming more and more severe. So the problem is becoming bigger and bigger. And that has actually led us to a second question. So it seems like DDoS is never dying. How does the current amplification attack landscape look like? Are we still seeing most of the attacks being abused or being conducted by legacy and long known problems and attack vectors, or are the attack vector landscape, is it constantly changing? So this is what we looked into this paper that appeared at PAM this year. That was a collaboration with the guys from DKIX, and here we had an ISP perspective on DDoS amplification attacks. And the first part is that we need to understand how these attacks can be identified. So the goal of the paper was we want to measure DDoS in the core of the internet. This is, of course, challenging because if we measure in the core of the internet, we need to deal with very high traffic rates and, of course, anonymity. So we don't have payload anymore that we can use for identification and so on. So the whole identification problem just becomes more and more challenging. So that was the first challenge that we needed to tackle here. How can we actually detect DDoS attacks in sample traffic because of high traffic rates? Now we see only few packets, not the entire packets that compromise a flow. And of course, because of anonymity, we only see very few bits of the actual packets, no payload, and so on. So how can we build a statistical technique that still lets us detect with a high accuracy DDoS attacks in the presence of these challenges here? And to do this, we actually did one step back and looked at like, okay, what's the problem that we actually want to solve? So we want to differentiate this situation, so unwanted DDoS traffic, from this situation here on the right-hand side, wanted traffic. And so what we then did was we looked at normal client traffic, so patterns of normal client traffic. And that could be, for example, all of us currently doing our Christmas shopping. So we have a large number of users that are, somewhere in the internet, and they request resources from a server. So the communication here, this is using a different ports. So nobody is doing shopping via NTP, for example. We're using the HTTP protocol. So the protocols that are being used here are different, and the ports that are being used are very different in normal client traffic as compared to DDoS traffic. If we now say that, yeah, but okay, this is easy, you cannot simply differentiate only by protocol, then I argue, yeah, this is correct. So now let's look at how an NTP time server in the internet, for example, is operating. So let's imagine here that this is your home server or your Raspberry Pi or whatever your server that you want to set an accurate time on. That is connecting to a number of time sources in the internet, so NTP servers. And you do that not with just one, but maybe 3 time sources. The general pattern here is that you don't configure like 1,000 or 100,000 of NTP servers to fetch the time from. That doesn't make sense. It's very few servers, and it's very low bandwidth that you're receiving here. You're just checking regularly checking what's the current time. That's it. It's low bandwidth, and you configure very few potential servers here. So this kind of knowledge that we can restrict it actually by amplification protocol. And for this amplification protocol, we can restrict it by the number of sources that you're querying here. This actually can be transferred into a filter mechanism that we employed here on sample traffic. And so the filter criteria is a 3-step process. So we require the source port where the traffic is coming from to be an amplification protocol. So NTP, DNS, but not HTTP, for example. The second step is that we require a victim to receive traffic from more than 10 sources. And by source, I mean an IP address here, because as we've seen in the example before, it's unlikely that you query a large set of NTP servers. And the third and last filter step is that we require the aggregate traffic here to be above 1 gigabit. And this is, again, one step back. It's very unlikely that you're receiving NTP traffic at a very high traffic rate from a large set of servers. If this is the case, and this is what we show then, this is very likely DDoS traffic and not benign traffic. So with that simple filter mechanism, we can reliably detect DDoS attacks in the core of the internet. And then we can apply this methodology at a single ISP, so directly in the core of the internet, and now have a perspective of how many attacks are currently going on a single day in the internet. And we find it's many. So up to 2,600 attacks we observed here at a single internet exchange point on a single day. So this is not a rare phenomenon. It's a common problem that we have in the internet every single day. If we now zoom in a little bit and look at the attack surface, so what kind of protocols are being abused for launching these DDoS attacks, we see that it's the classics. It's the protocols that we're talking about for ages that are being abused for launching DDoS attacks here. So we see here NTP, DDoS, and CLDAP. And they correspond to 90% of the attacks that we observe in the data set. Of course, we find more. So memcached, it's a protocol and an attack surface that we've been talking for a number of years now. This is kind of a known problem. It should have been fixed, but still it's a popular attack vector. Of course, we see also other ones here. So SSTP, this is used for sophisticated long duration attacks. It generates high traffic rates and high traffic volumes. And then, of course, there's a larger set of less frequent and new protocols that emerge here. And one of these new amplification protocols is OpenVPN. So this is, for example, the protocol that you might be using to connect to your enterprise network from your home office. And we see here that the attacks that are abusing the OpenVPN protocol, they grew by 500% in the period that we depict here. This sounds like a very high number here, but of course you have to keep in mind that the number of attacks is actually very low. So we talk in the order of, like, in April last year, we observed about 50 attacks. So we start from a very low number of attacks. So this was really unpopular, and now it's increasing in popularity here. So new amplification protocols are emerging, and they are becoming a thing, something that we need to monitor. The next question that we asked ourselves was, what is the influence of these DDoS attacks on the actual core internet perspective or core internet infrastructure? So, for example, the IXPs. Because typically, once we talk about DDoS attacks, we focus only on the victims' networks. So is Google or Akamai or Amazon or your favorite other network, is that suffering from a multi-terabit attack, yes or no? Is your university suffering from a multi-gigabit attack, yes or no? So typically, we talk about the victim's perspective, not so much what happens when the actual attack traffic is transported over the internet towards the victim. So here you have the infrastructure perspective. So we focus on the port capacity that is being used by DDoS attacks at an IXP. So what is an IXP? An IXP is simply a big switch, and you can pay a port to connect your fiber to that big switch and obtain connectivity. And what I'm showing here on the y-axis is the share of the line rate. So that could be, for example, a 10 gigabit or 100 gigabit port that is used by a DDoS attack. And so we see one bar here that is 100%, and that means if we're reaching 100%, the port that the IXP member is paying for is fully utilized by attack traffic. What we see here is that most of the time, for most of the attacks, we're actually below this 100%. So most of the attacks are well below port capacity. Actually, most of them, or a larger set, below 50% of the port capacity. So it seems that here we don't have a problem. And of course, we see points here, and this is the more interesting case, 0.18% of the attacks exceed port capacity. Now you might wonder, like, okay, how is this possible? It's possible because, of course, the switching fabric, so the attack traffic can come in at the IXP from multiple other ports or ports of higher capacity than the one that this particular member is paying for. So the actual attack traffic volume that hits a port of an IXP member can, of course, well exceed the capacity, the port capacity that the IXP member is paying for. And this is what you see here. And sometimes by a large margin or by a large fraction. So we have seen here a single attack that exceeds it by a share of 1,000%. But of course, this is the minority of the attacks. So for most of the IXP members, it seems like DDoS attacks are not causing any problems in terms of congestion or whatsoever. If we now look at the targets, we find interesting patterns here. This is one attack that we have observed here. And you see the time on the x-axis and the victim /24 IP address space. So starting from the network address up to the highest address in this /24 on the y-axis. And you see a fairly sequential pattern. So the attacker starts attacking one IP, then moves to the next IP, moves to the next IP, and so on. So once the attacker reached the highest IP, it goes back to the beginning of the prefix, and then kind of this pattern repeats. So if you look now into these individual attacks, you find more and more of these interesting cases here that can happen. Now, the next thing that we want to do is we want to mitigate DDoS attacks. So we have learned now a lot about the properties about these individual DDoS attacks and how they can look at the infrastructure level, at the victims level, and so on. Now we want to do something about actually DDoS attack mitigation. And the current standard that is mostly being done in the industry is that we mitigate these attacks close to the target. That could be, for example, by an intrusion detection or a DDoS filtering system that you install in your own network, or you pay somebody else to actually do the DDoS mitigation for you. That could be, for example, a CDN, which is then also close to the target web server that is actually hosting your infrastructure. Or you pay a DDoS scrubbing service, meaning that all of your traffic is redirected through a traffic scrubber, and that traffic scrubber can do the DDoS detection for you. So all of these are mitigation approaches that happen close to the target. Now, the question that we ask ourselves is that, well, but if these DDoS attacks are launched, they actually traverse a bit in the internet. And they could potentially, if the problem is becoming more severe, kind of pollute this core infrastructure here. So wouldn't it be nice to kind of drop the DDoS traffic earlier? So to do the DDoS detection directly in the core of the internet, and that would be, for example, these IXPs. And so that's what we're currently doing in this AI DOS project. So we are looking into artificial intelligence to actually detect DDoS traffic directly in the core of the internet. And if you now ask, like, yeah, okay, but what's the difference? So why is this problem so interesting? Isn't this all known? Don't we know the solutions here? Because we have these boxes here, we have traffic scrubbing services for long. So isn't this a known problem? And we simply like move these known DDoS mitigation strategies at the core. And the answer to that is, yeah, it's kind of a bit different. And the difference comes from that at the IXP in the core, because of routing asymmetries and because of this different distributed nature of these reflectors that are being abused, the traffic at a single vantage point directly in the internet core is only partially visible. And this is what you see here at this picture. So we have the attacker that launches reflection attacks using these reflectors. So that could be, for example, DNS servers that are, globally distributed around the world, meaning that if you have now an internet exchange point here, for example, in Spain, only part of the traffic of the attack traffic that is generated here will actually be routed through this internet exchange point and is visible here. So in contrast to these mitigation strategies directly at the target, if we run or try to do the mitigation in the core of the internet, so to drop the traffic early, we only see part of the traffic. But the benefit is, if we succeed, we can drop the traffic way earlier before it actually finds its way to the target. So that's the difference. That's kind of the challenge that we have to deal with it here, that only part on our attack is now only partially visible. So we have to deal with sparse information. Not all of the features, for example, could be computed anymore. And now the solution that we propose to that, and this is a paper that we have or that we presented at CCS this year, is that the solution, as typically in life, is we need to team up. So if we have multiple internet exchange points or other core infrastructure in the internet, if we allow them to team up and exchange information about ongoing DDoS attacks, the problem of partially visibility goes away. Now, the challenge is, how can we actually team them up? How can we exchange a bit of information, and what information, to jointly, in collaboration, detect these ongoing DDoS attacks? And this is what this paper is about. So we actually deployed and tested this at 11 internet exchange points distributed throughout the world. So we have IXPs in the US, IXPs in different parts of Europe. And we tried a collaborative scheme to detect these DDoS attacks. But actually, before I show you how this collaborative scheme works, let me quickly demonstrate you the benefit of this collaboration. So what I'm showing you here on the y-axis is the amount, the relative share of detectable traffic. And now we have this for different locations here. So SE5 means this is an IXP in Southern Europe. And now we have different bars here. This is using different detection threshold. Do we require the attack traffic to be more than 500 gigabits, to be more than 1 gigabit, more than 10 gigabits? So this is different attack detection thresholds that we kind of played with. And then the important thing is you see two difference here. So the solid bars are the ones where we actually team up. So we perform a global detection where all of these IXPs are jointly collaborating. And The kind of light dashed ones are where we do local detection only. And now the important difference here is that if you only look at the solid bars, you see that with collaboration, you can actually detect a fair amount of attack traffic, whereas if you do it without collaboration, only at a single location, you actually miss a large set of the ongoing attacks. So this is the perspective of this one IXP in Southern Europe. If we look at now a bigger IXP that has substantially more traffic, this kind of pattern here looks a bit different. So this IXP here is big enough to kind of see substantial traffic routed through it. So it doesn't really benefit that much from collaboration, yet it's still a bit of gain here is possible. Now, if we look at the whole spectrum, these IXPs that we have analyzed here, then we see that in particular for the smaller ones, we see the same pattern. So if these IXPs were to team up, their detection probability here goes up substantially, meaning that they miss substantially less DDoS traffic. So that's the benefit of collaboration that we see here. And now the question is, how can we implement this? How can we actually implement a sharing scheme that is privacy preserving and allows these different internet exchange points to collaboratively solve this DDoS detection problem? And what we propose here is a DDoS information exchange point. We call it DXP. So we have one central entity that works very similar to an internet exchange point. It's just that in contrast to an IXP, the members of this DXP are not sharing traffic, but they are exchanging information about ongoing DDoS attacks. And this can happen in two variants. So in a high trust scenario, where you actually exchange information about attacked IP addresses. This is, of course, sensitive information, so it requires a legal framework. Not every IXP will be able to implement this or actually wants to implement that. So we have a second scenario or a second environment here that we call a low trust DXP. And with this low trust DXP, we only exchange non-critical information, so only reflector IPs. That means I observe a DDoS attack currently ongoing that is using these public reflector IPs. And we assume that this is non-critical information because, you know, the list of DNS servers or OpenNTP servers is public information anyway, so this is probably non-critical. Now, we did the evaluation here, and we see here on the left-hand side, the attacks that we can detect without the DXP. And here on the right-hand side, we see the same locations, but now the DXP is enabled in two variants, the low trust and the high trust environment. And what you see that even if we enable the low trust environment, so we only exchange kind of public information, meaning that there's an DDoS attack currently ongoing that is using these public reflectors, we can already substantially boost the number of detected DDoS attacks. So already that is sufficient. And this is kind of the main contribution or the main story that we have in this paper, that core infrastructure should actually be teaming up to implement something like a DXP to share information about ongoing DDoS attacks and being able to substantially detect more DDoS attacks in the internet and kind of make the internet a better place that is less polluted with this annoying attack traffic. So with that, I'm at the end of the talk today. So I showed you something about the DDoS landscape as we see it in 2021. So DDoS is still a thing. I would claim it's the thing. So besides ransomware, it's currently the most pressing cybersecurity problem that we see here. We see also that new amplification protocols, they still emerge. So something like the abuse of OpenVPN. And the last part that I've shown you is that we should actually allow and enable core infrastructures such as internet exchange points to team up and substantially improve more the detection of DDoS attacks and be able to attack or detect more of these ongoing DDoS attacks and remove this attack traffic from the internet. So with that, I'm at the end. I would open now the floor for questions. Of course, I also have a few for you. So do you have experience with DDoS? What's your experience? If you don't have experience with DDoS, what currently bugs you with regards to cybersecurity? All right, so thanks a lot. Thanks for joining. And now let's open the floor for questions.
All right, so this is the problem when you have too many controls on your display. So because I was mute, but actually I was not mute, I was just mute in the system that I was using to be connected to you because I wanted to prevent you from the noise at the beginning. So Oliver, thanks a lot for the great talk. So representing our audience, I clap my hands for the audience. So I really loved it, and I especially loved the beginning to see a little bit of Brandenburg. It gave a lot of it made me very interested in visiting you soon. So it looked very nice there. So actually, we have a lot of questions. So we have more than 30 questions. And as Alex is not there today, I'm also taking the moderator role for the questions today. And still, let me start with the first question, which is from me. And it's, so why did you choose to do research in that domain? So what is the most fascinating thing about it, and why would you choose again to go exactly in this domain?
So what I find most fascinating is that this is a problem that we're talking about for ages, at least it feels like, but it's not really solved. It's like every time you look into the news, there is a new article about a new record-hitting DDoS attack that is actually causing trouble in the internet infrastructure. And it's like you start to scratch your head and ask yourself, like, there's so much research being ongoing. Why is this problem not going away? Why is it actually becoming more severe? It's not, we're not getting rid of it. It's actually becoming bigger and bigger. Why is this? What's currently going on? How often is this DDoS scene changing? Like, how often do the amplification protocols change? And so, yeah, what we currently, the kind of the perspective that we missed so far was to look like really into the core of the internet and see like a bigger picture of the attack landscape that we can observe, and to get like an understanding of, well, is there anything that we can do to make this stop, to make this problem go away? So this is a fascinating aspect that I find.
Very, very good. And there's a related question to that. It's a very difficult question, but probably you still have some ideas to it. Namely, what would be necessary to make DDoS attacks impossible? So what would we have to change in the internet, at the edge, at the center, to render DDoS attacks impossible? Will we have one day where we will have zero DDoS attacks? Is it an inherent problem of the architecture of the internet that we will always have them? So do you have a vision towards that direction?
Well, it's the same, I guess it's the same problem with the ring at your door, your doorbell. You kind of want to expose this doorbell to the public. So other people, like when Amazon is delivering your Christmas gifts, you actually want the mailman to actually ring the bell to notify you that a parcel is being delivered to you. Or if you're having a Christmas party, you want to receive guests. And the same is true in the internet. You actually want to expose that. At the same time, if kids are going around the block and they're making these jokes that we did as little kids, to press random to ring at random places, this is kind of annoying. This is what you don't want to have. At the same time, it's like you want to expose something to the public, yet you don't want to receive all the traffic that you can potentially do. So I would argue that this is kind of an inherent problem that is not so easy to get rid of. At least if you want to, you expose something to the public, so you have to deal with people abusing it. I would argue it's an inherent fact or an inherent problem to the entire infrastructure that you cannot easily get rid of. But still, I would claim that there's a number of steps that we can take to kind of lower the attack surface. And so one big problem that we have in the internet right now is spoofed IP addresses. So all of the reflection attacks are only possible because spoofed IP addresses. And that is, you need to spoof to send a request towards the reflector. So for example, you send a DNS request towards the DNS server, but you spoof the source IP address. So you fake it. Instead of your own source IP address, you insert the source IP address of the target. And if that packet is then sent and directed towards the reflector will do what the reflector will do, or what any server in the internet will do. It will, respond to the source, but the source IP address is spoofed. So it will respond to the spoofed IP address, which is the IP address of the victim. And this is a problem that we can get rid of, or at least partially get rid of, if more networks in the internet would do proper source IP filtering. This is, of course, not possible in all of the networks. In some of the customer provider networks, that would be possible. Many networks do that. There's a spoofer project from CADA. They actually try to get an empirical understanding of which networks allow source IP address spoofing, which do not. So I think it's generally hard to completely get rid of the problem, but there's like a large set of steps that we haven't, or that many networks haven't really taken to kind of eliminate at least the big attack surface. And that, for example, is solve the problem of IP address spoofing.
Okay, cool. And I mean, your answer reflects exactly that it's a complicated thing, but because things have and can be done at different parts of the internet, and this brings us to another question, which is what helps against DDoS attacks? So whom to target? The control networks, the reflection nodes. So what to target if I want to make a defense, if there's an attack ongoing, and are the parties communicating, the affected parties?
I didn't get the part about communicating amongst the affected parties.
So the question there is like, are the
shared experience between the victims, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. So the victims, and there's also another question, which is, are the attackers communicating? So what is the arms race between the two? But maybe let's separate the questions. Let's maybe stick first with the if I have a DDoS attack going on against me, and I am big, so I am Google. What would I do? So would I shut down or change the configurations of the reflectors? Would I shut down the control channels if there are any? What would be the knobs that I would like to turn?
Well, the only thing that helps in this case is bandwidth. If you don't have the bandwidth at your fingertips, you need somebody else to have the bandwidth. That could be, for example, a traffic scrubbing service. So this is a popular DDoS protection mechanism that many victims or many networks use to protect their services. If you subscribe to CDN services, for example, they offer that as well. And like the benefit that they have is that they have a lot of bandwidth, and typically more bandwidth than you would have. So that's kind of it's in a way a cat and mouse game that many networks hope that they have substantially more available resources or available bandwidth than the attackers have to launch DDoS attacks. And so, for example, if you look at these booter-based attacks, then this is absolutely true. So for if you pay a couple of bucks at a booter service to launch an attack against Akamai, and Akamai receives like a few gigabits of DDoS traffic, they would laugh about that. You know, this is insignificant. This is too small. You need substantially higher traffic volumes to take down Akamai, or to potentially take it down. And with that, you get into the area of high-profile, highly targeted attacks. And you know, it's really hard to do something about that. So if somebody really wants to seriously wants to break into your house and, you know, monitors your house for like months to like profile when you are at home and so on, and finds weaknesses in your security setup, I would argue that, you know, the more resources an attacker has, and the higher the willingness to actually invest these resources to launch attacks against you, the higher the success rate will be. So high-profile attacks, this is something that is hard to protect from. That's at least what I would argue. These, you know, random booter-based, you know, somebody clicks a button here and it pays a few bucks, or, you know, somebody writes a small script to abuse some DNS servers and so on to generate a few gigabits of traffic. This is a problem that you could get rid of with substantial bandwidth. And if you don't have that substantial bandwidth with DDoS protection services or filter mechanisms that you could, you know, implement outside of your network. So one of these filter mechanisms would be you pay for a traffic scrubbing service. So all of your traffic is routed through that traffic, or partially routed through that scrubbing services to detect and filter attack traffic. Another popular service is called blackholing. So this is something that, for example, internet exchange points offer. Blackholing works as follows. So if you're under attack, you can signal that traffic towards a particular IP address should be blocked to the IXP, and then the IXP would simply act as a firewall so that all the traffic towards this IP that you signaled will be sent to the black hole, so it won't reach you and it won't take resources away from you. So for all of these cases, it's there is a large set of you know, technical solutions out there that you can deploy to protect your network against DDoS attacks. But then, of course, against high-profile attacks, if we don't know, let's speculate when we will see the first two-digit terabit attack. Well, this is of course challenging, even for like the very big networks out there.
Okay, so maybe let's quickly stay there. So how much internet traffic are DDoS attacks today? So what is the bandwidth? As I know, you do lots of internet measurements, so when you have contact to the exchange points and so on. So if I have 100% traffic a day, how much of it is a DDoS attack on a typical day? And in relative and absolute numbers.
That's a good question. I would need to go back to the data, then I could tell you. So we haven't directly looked into that.
Okay. Then
I mean, it's temporarily it can be substantial. So that's what we saw in these infrastructure perspective. So if you just take a single port, a single member at an IXP, temporarily for a short amount of time, this can exceed your available port capacity. But for the overall, I need to go back to the data set.
Oh, sure, no problem. And but can you give a number, as you said, when we have two-digit tags? So what is a bandwidth that is typically used, or what are the biggest ones? Do you have those numbers in mind? More or less. I mean, we don't need any details there.
So it's like a lot of these attacks. So, and it's actually the large bulk of these attacks that we see. They're in the 1 to 2 digit gigabit range. This is the big bulk of the DDoS attacks that we see in the internet. 3-digit gigabit attacks to higher traffic rates. This is something that we see, but it's of course less frequent. So it's depending on when we look. So for example, for the IMC 2019 paper, we observed a number of 3-digit DDoS attacks. So in the order of 600, 700 gigabits. When we looked again later for the PAM paper into the overall attack landscape, so that was more than a year, more than 1.5 years later, we actually haven't seen these large attacks in the data set anymore. It doesn't mean that they're going away. They're definitely not going away. It just means that you don't see them every single day. But what you see every single day is 1 and 2 digit gigabit DDoS attacks.
Very, very interesting, because it's like, I mean, you're working with that every day, but the people that are watching the stream, for them, it's like, wow. And so this is also why I asked. So then you talked about, okay, we have these 2-digit gigabit attacks. And so that means we need quite a number of reflection services, probably. So did you look with your group at which are the originating countries of these reflections? Are there any countries where you see more of these entities? Does the IoT play a role there? Can you say something about that?
So the answer to that is complicated. So let me start with the IoT question. So the big attack that was launched against Akamai a couple of years ago, that was also popular as the attack against Krebs on security. So Krebs on security is a security block that is hosted at Akamai, and kind of this attack was, or this block was under attack. And of course, with that, the Akamai infrastructure is under attack. So this DDoS attack was actually an IoT-based attack. So it was launched using Mirai. And I would actually assume that the IoT and the resources, so if we can, motivate our light bulbs or intelligent light bulbs and smart speakers and whatever to team up and, send traffic towards the victim, this, I guess, is becoming more and more a thing. And this was kind of the ingredient to launch this at the time record-hitting 3 or 1.4 terabit attack against the Akamai infrastructure. So this was possible because of the abuse of IoT resources. And yes, my gut feeling is, I cannot prove this, but my gut feeling and my expectation would be that as the IoT is becoming more popular and we're installing more and more of these devices in our homes, they're of course becoming an attack surface that will be more and more abused, and also abused for launching DDoS attacks. In terms of the distribution of infrastructure or reflection infrastructure in general, I'm not sure if there's like a real trend, because the thing is, in principle, you can abuse any public internet infrastructure as a DDoS reflector that is exposing a service to the internet and is UDP based. So UDP based because that's currently the ingredient to use to launch reflection attacks with spoofed source IP addresses, because then you don't need to establish a handshake and a connection with the targets. Of course, this is not, this is not the end of it. So new attack vectors are being discovered. So at Usenix Security, there was this year, so Usenix Security this year, there was a paper appeared that I personally found quite shocking. And the main story of the paper, so it came from the group of Dave Levin at the University of Maryland. And the main contribution of that paper was that for a long time, we thought that these UDP-based amplification reflection attacks are the largest ones that are possible, because we don't need to establish a connection that wouldn't be possible with spoofed source IP addresses. And we can, with protocols like Memcached, arrive at fairly substantial amplification rates of more than 50,000. So for a long time, we thought that, this is the ingredient to record hitting DDoS attacks, and this is what we need to do. So this is really the problem. What this paper from Dave Levin and his colleagues at the University of Maryland now showed is that you can actually, that was a proof of concept, so you can actually generate much higher traffic volumes with TCP attacks if you abuse censorship infrastructure. And the core idea of that is that a censorship infrastructure, such as middle boxes that inject traffic, for example, at the Great Firewall of China, they're actually not assuming that you need to complete a handshake. You send a packet, the middle box kind of assumes, because of traffic asymmetry in the routing and so on, it assumes that, yeah, I don't need to observe the entire traffic, but I observe one packet. So for example, a HTTP request with a spoofed source IP addresses. And then it injects, for example, a manipulated web page. So it replies, so you send a small HTTP request, and the censorship middle box replies with a large web page back. And because the request was using a spoofed source IP address, that brings us back to the problem that we discussed earlier. Source IP address spoofing is a serious problem in the internet that networks should be working on solving. So that censorship middle box, it responds back to the victim with a large web page. And not enough, you can get into like loops where what does the TCP stack do if it receives a packet or multiple packets from a sender that, where no state about connection level state exists? It will reply with a reset packet. Now a dump middle box, censorship middle box, will then assume that, oh yeah, this guy is communicating with me again. He's trying to request it again and again. So it does the same thing. It replies back with a censored web page. And now this loop is going on forever. And this is what these people, what Dave Levin and his colleagues have shown in this Usenix security paper. So this is a proof of concept. They have conducted fairly substantial internet measurements to showcase the problem that this is really possible with censorship infrastructure, yet we haven't seen DDoS attacks that abusing that. So no, I don't think that the problem will go away. I will think that because of these new attack surfaces that are being discovered and the IoT and other aspects, it will become more severe and bigger. So when will we hit the 10 gigabits, the terabits? I don't know, but we will.
Yeah,
That's what I know.
Yeah. That is quite probable. Yes. So, and regarding the countries, you said already that censoring countries like China might be unwillingly a good host for such reflectors that are then increasing the attacks. So is there something, when I look at the map, that you could say, okay, Buddha's origin typically at this and that country is, a question goes also into the direction, is that also something that is used in political warfare or cyber warfare, that we see that certain countries are offering such services in order to destabilize other countries and so on?
Well, of course, the answer to that is, I guess, it depends. It depends on the kind of infrastructure that you're looking at. So if your infrastructure is, for example, a DNS server that you abuse for reflection, it could be any DNS server. It could be the DNS server that our university is providing, that your university is providing. So there's no really like country level hotspots or whatever. So this is, I guess, true for a number of these amplification protocols, not all of them. If you now look at the censorship infrastructure and the censorship middle boxes that kind of inject or rewrite traffic, this is, of course, there you definitely find hotspots. And for example, this is also what they showed in this Usenix security paper this year, that, of course, like the censorship infrastructure, it exists in these countries that are fairly repressive and are known to implement censorship technologies.
Our next question is, are booters illegal? And how is it in different countries? So are there countries where they're not illegal, or on which basis are they illegal? I don't know if you know something about it, but
I guess you're asking this question to the wrong person. So I'm not a lawyer. I don't know about their legal status. I cannot really make a legal case. It's, of course, like the service that they're offering is stress testing. So many of them, they sell it as like, we're a service that helps you to stress test your own infrastructure. The only problem is that they don't, validate the target IP address that you enter into the web page. So you can abuse the service to stress test any infrastructure, which is, I guess, the problematic point. And then, of course, like the second problematic point is that they're abusing infrastructure of other people. And that's, for example, DNS servers, NTP servers. That's infrastructure that they don't run themselves, that they don't control themselves. They haven't, asked for permission to use these services. They just, scan the internet for open reflectors that they can abuse for launching attacks. So I'm not a lawyer, but from my naive understanding, I would tend to think that these services are probably illegal, but as I'm not a lawyer, I cannot give you a definitive answer, but
okay,
it sounds very problematic to me.
I'm happy with the answer already. So
let's the fact that we have law enforcement agency targeting these high-profile booter services
is an indicator
that also tells a story.
So let's maybe move a little bit closer to your research again. So when I look over the year, so are there periods where we have more DDoS attacks ongoing, or is there like an equal distribution, more or less, also over the times of the day? So is there some patterns that you could identify?
No, it's so I showed you one of the plots earlier. Where we looked into the effect of these FBI takedown, and there we see a fluctuation. So sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less DDoS, and we were not really able. So there is some patterns that you can identify. So sometimes gamers are a particular problem. So at particular times when people are at home, gamers are at home, and they have time to play games, then DDoS against gaming infrastructure is on the rise, but Other than that, it's like really hard to make out patterns in these attacks. At least for us, it kind of looks like a random process. There probably is a pattern behind that, but so far we don't really know what the pattern is and what is really driving this this pattern. When you look into like the literature about booter services, so for example, there are some papers that analyzed so the customer databases from booter services after there was a takedown from law enforcement. You see some of these patterns, so that, for example, gaming is a thing at booter services, and this is just because these attacks are cheap. If the same is true for high-profile attacks, I don't know. So if we look at the bulk, the aggregate of all of the DDoS attacks that we see, for example, at IXPs, I personally find it like really hard to make out a pattern here. So I don't really know what is driving all of this.
Oh, okay, cool. Did COVID have an impact on DDoS attacks? So did they rise? Did they get more complex through more people being at home and maybe having time to invest in that?
So we for the PAM paper we looked into that, and again, here it's like really hard to see a general trend because the entire picture is already very highly fluctuating. So it's very hard to work out some effect that is indeed statistically significant. So we haven't seen that. One thing that we have looked into with respect to COVID was these attacks against VPN infrastructure. So we particularly looked into VPN infrastructure to see if VPN infrastructure is now under attack, because if I were an attacker, don't quote me for that, if I were an attacker and all of the employees of a particular company are sent to home office, and I know that they need to access the internal infrastructure, internal file servers and everything through VPN services, then the easiest case to actually create financial damage to that company is to attack these VPN gateways. It's very easy to work them out, to identify them, so very easy to launch DDoS attacks against that. So for the PAM paper in this measurement period, that was the beginning of COVID last year, we particularly looked into this problem. So we did dig into massive DNS data sets to identify VPN gateways, and we looked at if they were targets of DDoS attacks. And yeah, so far we haven't, really found a general trend against that. That was the measurement that we did was in the at the beginning of the COVID period. It might be that this has changed since then, but back then, for the PAM paper, that was like the good takeaway that we had, that luckily no attacker seems to be abusing that, at least not at the massive scale or at the noticeable scale. So from that perspective, no impact of COVID.
Okay, cool. Then we have we only have 2 minutes left, so maybe let's try to answer some questions just quick. Let me just choose those that are quite easy. So someone was asking, so what is an Alexa rank?
An Alexa rank is a page rank by a company called Alexa that identifies the top 1 million popular domains. So they create a traffic rank of domain popularity.
Okay, perfect.
Web page domain popularity.
Very good. Can my devices be used as DDoS devices?
Which devices?
My devices. The question is, so someone's devices, so the smartphone, the computer, the IoT device. So.
In principle, yes.
what software has to run on a DDoS reflector?
Well, it depends on the protocol that is being abused. So if you're using the NTP protocol for a reflection attack, then an NTP server needs to run on it. If you're using DNS, then a DNS server needs to run on it. So it depends on the amplification protocol that is used for running the attack.
What are Google and Facebook doing against DDoS attacks?
Well, you have to ask Google and Facebook, I guess.
Okay.
Not me.
What is the role of content delivery networks? You were talking about them before regarding DDoS attacks.
So the role of CDNs is that they're, I guess all of them currently are offering DDoS protection services because they have substantial spare capacity. The business model is currently that they offer hosting, low latency hosting, and with that is DDoS protected. So you can pay for DDoS protection services.
Okay, cool. Is the increase of global internet bandwidth good or bad concerning DDoS attacks?
Well, I think this is uncorrelated.
Okay. This is also an interesting question. So what is the most important skill programmers should have to improve cybersecurity and more in particular security against DDoS attacks? Is there something when I develop a program that I can take care of? You already said like source IP address validation. This would probably be one of the answers, but do you have something else?
I think the top skill that you need to have is curiosity. That's not a technical skill, but you have to be curious about what can go wrong, what can happen here. And if you don't have curiosity, then I think it will be hard.
And maybe maybe two last questions. So the first one is, do researchers like you and companies that develop solutions work together? And related to that, there's another question, like what is if you do now research, how does it impact the market? So is it like, okay, nice, you did that, or is it like, oh yeah, cool, big infrastructure providers and so on take it on, and then they implement something and it has immediate impact, or what is the time to market for such research? So first, collaboration between the researchers and companies, and second, how long does it take when you reveal something until something happens?
So yes, we talk to cybersecurity companies. And so, for example, the attack vectors that we have the new attack vectors that we have identified in the PAM paper, a cybersecurity company that we talked to, they were really very interested in that. They didn't have them on the radar, and they're, I guess, at least that's what they told us, now implementing identification methods for that. So they take it into their product portfolio. What's the time to market? I don't know, I guess a couple of months, but at least we shared the results with them. They were very interested in that. They didn't know about these attacks, and they're actually adding them to their product portfolio. The same thing for IXPs. So yeah, this is, I guess, becoming a product at IXPs, DDoS detection directly at the IXPs. That's what we're working on. So this will also then, to the benefit of all the internet users.
Okay, and then the other question is, what resources do you work with at your university or in your network? So if I want to do such research, what do I need?
It depends on what you want to do. So you need a network that is exposed to the internet. So many of the DDoS research is using active measurements. So you need to send out traffic to the internet. You also need to receive traffic. So a lot of the research, at least of the earlier DDoS research, was using honeypots. So setting up honeypots in particular in university networks or data centers. So this is something that you can do, but of course, the space is now well explored. If you want to look into the core as we did, then of course you need a collaboration with an internet service provider or an IXP. So I guess it really depends on the kind of problem that you're trying to solve here.
Okay, very good. So it depends. So you're almost a lawyer, because they also often say it depends. And the really, really last question is, in your life as a researcher, what was the biggest disruption in the research that you're working on? So was there an event that you would retrospectively say, okay, wow, this was really a turning point?
A paper reject that you get about a paper that you're really proud of? I don't know. I would guess that's
okay, yeah, that's
the biggest threat to your life as a researcher.
Yeah, that's right. That's very good. So Oliver, thank you very much. So I especially also loved the discussion as always. And yeah, so thank you very much. Let me clap again for you. Thank you very much.
It was a great pleasure. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're always welcome again. So let me just open the info. So this was the last edition for this year. So we had 13 exciting talks this year, and the series will also continue next year. And the next talk will be by Carol Fung from the Virginia Commonwealth University, and Carol will talk about security and privacy protection for IoT networks. So it's closely related, also cybersecurity topic. If you did miss some of the editions of this year, do look at the website. They are all still on there in all the networks that we're using. And as usual, don't forget to comment, to like, and also to subscribe on the YouTube channel, but also on the Twitter and on the Facebook and also on the website. There we also have the newsletter. If you put your email address, you will not miss any of the announcements for that. And that said, I just look if I forget something. I don't think so. I will switch over to the outro. You will see Carol, who will tell you something what she'll be talking about. And then you also see already all the announcements for next year, because we almost have all slots already filled. One slot is still free. So if you have someone who could be interested in talking and you would be interested to see, please contact us, and we'll try to make it happen. So have a great Christmas time, and see you all hopefully on the 25th of January in the next year. Have a happy new year. And yeah, thanks a lot, Oliver, and see you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Happy New Year. Happy holidays.
Smartphones and smart home devices are getting very popular. However, there's some security concerns. For example, privacy leaks. We all know that some devices are compromised and then be used to launch attacks to the others. So in this talk, I will address the security and privacy issues of IoT networks and systems, and discuss my recent research that provides solutions to help general users to protect their security and privacy, as well as solutions to provide a scalable solution by utilizing new network technologies to combat DDoS attacks.
Cher cybercéanie, pôle d'excellence région Bretagne. Au revoir et à la prochaine.